Okay, so welcome everyone to today's seminar. So we have Andrea Saltelli with us today. Andrea is at University of Bergen and Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. But he has a long career and experience at the Commission at JRC, where he was heading till 2014-2015 the statistics unit. Andrea is best known for his work on global sensitivity analysis. If you know about global sensitivity, you certainly heard Andrea's name in a famous textbook and a lot of papers. But most recent years, Andrea has looked actually even more about issues of quantification in science, ethics of science, and many other things, including also mathematical modeling and how to do it responsibly. And this is a big issue for us who do modeling in our institutions and for the people online who are interested in modeling real world problems, high-stake problems and high-stake issues, obviously. First of all, because we have a big responsibility when informing big important policy decisions, such as those on climate change, as we do at our institute, but of course, more broadly, all the policy relevant questions. But more than that, in a way, it is about the survival also of the modeling as a practice, a scientific practice. Even in our community, models used to inform climate science, think about the IPCC, has been heavily criticized from many points of views and different angles. And in order to remain credible and to remain a good scientific practice, which has an influence on good policy making, modeling needs to do a series of things. And Andreas, I thought quite carefully, and I think more than other scholars that at least I am aware of, about what are these steps needed to ensure that what we do can survive and can help make this a better world and better policy. So thanks, Andrea. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Massimo, for inviting me, and thank you for coming here to listen to this discussion on responsible modeling. Actually, I'm not so fond of the word responsible because, especially my former organization, was used as a way to clean, whatever. You had growth, responsible growth, and so you have modeling, which may have problem, but then you make it responsible and you clean it up. So I'm about to publish a book where the title is, in the end, The Politics of Modeling Number Between Science and Policy, which is a bit what you are doing. So this is, whether then this is responsible or not, I don't want to take a stand on that. So we have many authors here. Wendy is Espeland is sociologist for quantification. Dan Sarevis is a political scientist. Andy Stirling is an STS scholar, science and technology study. Philip Stark is a statistician. Ting Xu is a jurist, and Jerome Raves is a philosopher. So I have put together this eclectic band or gang to discuss mathematical modeling. This talk is already on my website. So if you want to take some of my reading suggestions, you don't need to scribble it down. You will find it there. I will start with something very, very basic, which comes from Relational Ecology, this beautiful book by Robert Rosen. And he said in the most clear of terms that modeling is a craft rather than a science. And he makes a discussion using the categories of Aristotle. He says modeling is a formal system, so formal causality applies there. In the natural system, you have material causality, efficient causality, and final causality. So these two families of causality don't really talk to one another, at least not in a deterministic fashion. So the idea of mapping a natural system into a formal system is not a science, it's rather an art or a craft. And this is the idea. And then, there is a lot of literature about that, because the article I'm quoting from Louis here says, what is a living system? A living system is an anticipatory system because it can adapt to things which still have to happen. And how do we know that this system has this anticipatory capacity? Well, because it has a model of itself. So natural self-evolving systems possess, according to this theory, a model of themselves, which allows them to revert the arrow of time and to anticipate things yet to happen. Okay, this is the relational ecology story. And this is Robert Rosen. models are in a sense very special, and I will go back to this, but I like to quote Naomi Oreskes. She wrote some very interesting things about mathematical modeling. Now she's better known for her advocacy in the climate battle. She's very much on regulatory capture and so on. It says, well, models are mostly used to disprove things more than to prove things. And this, in my experience, I found that this is very much the case. Models are not physical law. What does it mean? That you cannot disprove a model in a sense, no? Because, you know, if you use the theory of Popper, you can use an experiment to disprove a theory, not to prove it, to disprove it. So it's a kind of negative theology here. But you cannot use a model to refute a theory which generated the same model. And why? Well, because a model is something more complicated. You know, it's very difficult to say what went wrong if the model does not agree with the observation. What was it? The law, the input data, the conceptualization? Any of these could be wrong. It could even be a coding error. Why not? And so for this reason, you don't have the falsification. It's not easy to falsify a model. Additionally, people like you know very well that model, especially the large kind of model you handle, they come with their own data set. No? So how could those data disprove the model when the data and the model have, in a sense, co-evolved? There is also some literature on this. Some author talks about incestuous relation between data and models. And so the incestuous comes from the Popperian idea that model and data have to be kept separate because one has to be used to test the other, but this is not possible in practice with large models. Okay, and this is another discussion. Models have also a little memory, or if you prefer, the people writing model may forget some of the assumptions which went into it. I took this quote by a philosopher. It talks about value at risk, VAR model, which are used to do the pricing of a portfolio. And he says, well, most often, not even the modeler themselves know what hypotheses went into the construction of the model. And those VAR models are very important because they are used to decide on investment property also for large funds. Short of doing their work, you cannot reproduce really the pattern of assumption which was used. And then there is a story of the economists. Now, the economists always like to fill their mouth with ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus means all the rest being equal, but we know that all the rest is not equal, no? You cannot, and this is very much the case for dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models, where what you do is substantially you change a variable or a time series, and you force it through the model, and you see how this shock propagates. But doing this, you keep all the other series constant, and this is not what happened in real life. So there is nothing wrong in doing this for trying to understand how the economy works, how one sector impacts on another sector, but it's totally different things in using the same kind of model to make actual prediction. And in fact, when things went wrong, and those models could not predict the recession starting in 2000 and the Lehman Brothers story, you know, those models were asked why they could not predict it. The Queen called the economists of the London School of Economics, the US Senate called the best economists they had, and those economists revealed that this DSG model did not have a financial sector. So of course they could not predict a subprime mortgage crisis, because this is really coming from the financial part of the economy. Now in recent years, there has been a lot of discussion about the mathematization of economics, seen as some kind of degeneration, if you allow me. No, here you have a number of authors. Wolfgang is one of the authors of the book. Eric is another good companion. He wrote Why Rich Countries Are Rich and Why Poor Countries Remain Poor, a very famous book translated in 26 or 27 languages. Paul Romer was chief economist of the World Bank, and he resigned. He resigned from the World Bank just because of this. He wrote he wrote an article talking about mathematization, mathiness. And he defined mathiness as clothing, a normative position as mathematics. And he told his fellow macroeconomist, listen, what you do is that you are clothing your opinion on how society should be ruled into mathematics. He didn't make many friends in this way, but anyhow, he stood by. And then Philip Mirowski already mentioned. So I wrote myself with Eric an article on this where we talk about the Ricardian dream. Now, the dream that you can, when you have an exchange between trading partners with different levels of development, the trading is beneficial for both partners. For us, this is pure madness, but this is official, this is economics 101. And so we talk about dreams, no? The Cartesian dream, the dream of prediction and control of man over nature. And then you have the Ricardian dream, the dream that if we trade and you give me banana and I give you Mercedes, we shall all be better off in the long run. Okay, so now I'm something a bit more dramatic in a sense in this idea of the what happened when you do modeling is comes in a way, if you want, from a novel by Jorge Luis Borges. Who likes Borges among you? Okay, you have a few. And this is a very nice stories about a novel where the chapters are very confused. You don't understand what's going on in this book, but then in the end, you understand that what's happening in this book is that each chapter takes a different turn from the one taken in the previous chapter. So you have like several stories where someone who is dead in one chapter is alive in another, and so on and so forth. This is supposed to be written by a non-existing Chinese scholar, Cui Pen, and the idea is to take different narrative within the same story, and this would be the forking path, no? The Garden of the Forking Path. It's a very nice story. But then Gell-Mann and Loken, Gell-Mann is a very, I don't know much Loken, but Andrew Gell-Mann is a very famous American statistician, wrote an article about that, talking about multiple comparison and talking about, well, the issue of fishing expedition. What is a fishing expedition? When you try the data with an hypothesis, doesn't work. Male versus female, you throw it away. Try old versus young, doesn't work. You try black versus white, it doesn't work, you throw it away. And you do this over and over till something sticks, no? Till you have a favorable p-value, and you say, oh, I found an effect. And if you are trained in statistics, you know that this is not okay, because if you do it 100 times, at least 5, you will have a significant effect when you don't, no? So that's why it's called a fishing expedition, no? Fishing for effect by, you know, looking at your data under any possible angle till you find an angle which gives you a message. And very often this is not the result of p-hacking, which would be doing this maliciously, let's say. No, you do it inadvertently, simply because you don't know about multiple comparison. And because people wanted to test if this is the case, a group of 75 or so, how many, I don't remember, a large group of different teams, 75 teams, tried to work on the same data. And the data, if I remember well, was about whether the referee in football games were particularly hostile toward black players. Okay, this was the hypothesis. Are the referee biased by racism? And so they did this analysis, and the analysis was published a few months ago on TNAS. But the analysis has been known for a long time because it was on the preprint. And what they found is incredible. They found all possible effects, from positive to negative. Okay, this is telling us that even if you are not malicious at all, simply the fact of making different choices in the setting up of your data, how you clean them, how you curate them, how you treat the outliers, and what's not, no, has an impact on the inference, so that you obtain this all possible result from negative to positive. This doesn't mean that all modeling is wrong. This means that there are cases where the modeling is uncertain, but we should know about this uncertainty, because if we don't know about this uncertainty, we lose quality. And I will be coming back to this. 73 teams, from large negative to large positive. Okay, So, okay, this you know, don't confuse the map with the territory. And if you do this sensitivity analysis will not save you. This is one of the examples I like more to show because it's about nuclear waste management, which is a field where I was working many, many years ago. Is in this book with Orin Pilkey. So when you do a sensitivity analysis of your model, it will not help you if the model is a poor representation of reality. You will not understand the real sensitivity of the system, but only the sensitivity of the model. And this is a classical example. You can mount a repository system. They had a lot of money to do this mathematical analysis. I did something similar when I was much, much younger. So they have this total system performance assessment model composed of 286 models. And to calculate how this nuclear waste from deep down 300 meters would be reached by the water percolating with rain and then come back and then reach an aquifer and then go to a well and then go to the pasture and then to man, blah, 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 blah. You work out all the chain of effect, you calculate those and you decide whether the repository is safe. But unfortunately, they miscalculated not as an output, as an input. They made an error in the input, in the percolation rate by 4 orders of magnitude. How did they discover this? Because they made a digging and discovered 36 chlorine, which is an artificial isotope. It's only existing because of the nuclear detonation done in the atmosphere in the 80s. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it around, no? You know the story of the Anthropocene, which is characterized by the couche of nuclear fallout. Okay, this story. So in other words, they discovered that the percolation rate was wrong of 4 orders of magnitude. They calculated 0.02 millimeter. It was 3 meters per year. So sensitivity analysis, of which I will say a bit later, is not useful in these cases. The conclusion of Pilkey, or in Pilkey, is that when you build a model, you should be the first one to try to show that your own model is wrong. And this is, by the way, one of the Mertonian norms of science. Now, one of the 4 is organized skepticism. The other are communalism, universalism, and disinterestedness. I guess do you have this in university? Have you ever met Merton in your university studies? No. Okay, ready. That's what we were discussing. Okay, Merton is anyhow maybe the first sociologist of science. Another angle to look at this is the angle of the uncomfortable knowledge and how to avoid uncomfortable knowledge and how models can be used for that. This is the late Steve Reiner. And he says, well, when you want to avoid some kind of using science, using research to avoid some kind of knowledge which is uncomfortable, you can use denial, dismissal, diversion, and displacement. I will only discuss displacement because displacement is based on mathematical model. In other words, instead of looking at reality, you build a model and you look at the model instead of looking at reality. No? So you have, for example, the direction of progress, but the progress is only in the model. And the example was this example of hydrology. They were checking the excessive loading of nutrients in the lake, in the basin, in the model, as opposed to looking into the basin itself. No? So models should not be used as a tool of displacement. That's the idea. And there are other cases. One other one is in this book and has to do with the American Army Corps of Engineering using model genesis for coastal erosion. Coastal erosion is very hard to model because coastal erosion is mostly driven by extreme events. And extreme events are most impossible to model. You have no clue. They have a long tail distribution. You don't know their property. You don't know even their frequency. You don't know much about them. Okay. And now comes to where sensitivity analysis could help. And this is a conjecture of O'Neill. I describe it in this article. In this article, I made this kind of diagram. I haven't done it. This is a diagram which is known under several names, but the idea is that if you increase the complexity of the model, initially you improve the model because you gain descriptive feature. But those descriptive features come with parameters which you need to estimate. So the estimation error increase. So at the end of the day, the propagation, there is a kind of propagation, uncertainty cascade, if you want. And then the model error does this kind of smile. This is a conjecture, it is not a theory, but it's a conjecture which is known in many disciplines. Also in someone called it a compatibility principle. So when you increase complexity, precision and significance or relevance become almost, so you gain precision if you wish, but your precision is illusory, okay? So that's the idea. And if you do some kind of sensitivity analysis, you can learn that, because sensitivity analysis will instruct you of how uncertainty is your prediction and also tell you where this uncertainty is coming from, because maybe you are more sensitive to a certain source of uncertainty. And you also can compute something called effective dimension, because the true complexity of your model is not given by the number of parameters, but by the number of effective parameters, those parameters which do something on the output, and how much they interact among themselves. Okay, so this was published very few months, a couple of months ago. So I strongly suggest that you can try to understand something about the effective dimension of your model. This was written 2 years ago, again involving, with a lot of supplementary information, involving a bunch of people coming from all different, there is, okay, some suspects are the same. Now there is again, Andy Stirling, Jerry Ravets, Eric Reiner was always there. Mayu is another important statistician. Philip Stark was there. And we had a few sociologists of science, sociologists of quantification, Bruno Didier, Wendy Espeland, and Theodore Porter. Theodore Porter is very famous in sociology of numbers. Okay, so what we did was to look at models, because models were very much being discussed in the context of COVID. And what happened, maybe some of you have followed the story, is that this model of the Imperial College written by Ferguson, which was a rather big model with agent-based, more a study model than a policy model, was used to infer which policy should be taken. And some people complained. Some people said, oh, this model is being used as a chameleon, no? Depending on the need, it's a study model or it's a policy assessment model. It cannot be both, no? And many people, the people who did not like the measure taken for fighting COVID took it up with the models, because models were seen as responsible for those policies, no? So you have this title from the New York Times. And in this, you hear what happened when actually both Johnson and Trump said that they decided on containment measure precisely because of the model of the Imperial College. And so the people who are, even more on the right of those two complain, saying, this is, what does it say? Talking about wild ass COVID numbers. The minute I hear anybody start talking about models, I blanch, I vomit. Okay, this is a really bad extreme right guy. But also, scholars spoke about mathematical model as public trouble, meaning that model can do damage in a sense, okay, if misused. And then all of a sudden, you discover that even professional politicians could speak in a very literate and competent way about mathematical modeling. This guy is a conservative MP in the UK, and if you listen to the podcast or to the YouTube, he knows everything which happened with the model of Ferguson. All his history, bad foot and mouth disease, mad cow disease, how wrong choices were made apparently because of this model. This is the literature I know because I studied this, but this is not me. He's a politician. In theory, this shouldn't be his dossier, right? But no, he knows everything about that, and he can talk, in a public hearing, making a kind of Jeremiad against the model of Imperial College. So we now have, if what I want to convey here is that you are no longer hidden in a kind of, defended from the external world because they don't know what you are doing. Yeah, this may not be true. These people may know. So we came up with a number of things which could improve things, to be careful about what assumption. I will go through them, so you don't need to. But the first one was mind assumption, because very often mathematical models want from us data which we don't have, and also because those data are uncertain, we should do uncertainty and sensitivity. John Kay was one of the authors of the manifesto. He's an economist, columnist of the Financial Times, and he has this beautiful example based on web tag. Those are input data which go into a model for transport policy in the UK. And one of the inputs for the model is how many people will be sitting in the car 3, 4, 5 decades from now. According to you, there will be more or less people sitting in a car 3 decades from now, or 4? Who say more? Why? Sorry? To reduce emission. Who says less? Why less?
Because people have fewer kids.
Okay, I mean, the point I was trying to make is that really you cannot say whether they are more or less. You have no clue. I mean, this depends on how society will evolve, so we don't know. Okay, so that was the idea, no? This is precisely why John Kay selected this example for doing this. The second, okay, I mentioned this mind the hubris. My friend Andy Stilling, I was discussing, says we shouldn't throw the baby of the mathematical modeling with the dirty water of modeling hubris. No, the idea is that modeling hubris can really be counterproductive for the reason we discussed before. So you want to capture the reality better, but this may backfire. And then additionally, there is a kind of rhetorical side attached to it, which goes with the modeling hubris, because we always hear about expected utility, decision theory, life cycle assessment, cost-benefit analysis, but very often those kind of expressions want to convey the idea that we can calculate someone very precisely, no? But very often this precision is spurious in a sense. It is only precise because you have ignored important uncertainty, no? And then you this paper came out a few days ago. It's very beautifully written by Andy. If you have a chance, you can give it a look. So there is these eternal promises, no, from the institution who do impact assessment, that they have the next method which is really solves the problem, no? And he says, well, every time the promise of accuracy is just based on poor assessment of uncertainty. And this is also a book edited by Ian Scott and Stirling on the politics of uncertainty. And in this chapter in particular, they give you an explanation of why those institutions tend to be reductionist. I don't enter into this now. This would be a separate talk. But if you're interested, this chapter written by Van Zwanenberg discuss a bit the history of why, for instance, the European Commission has a noticeable tendency to some kind of reductionism in this impact assessment. Well, mind the framing is a bit like mind the assumption. So which were the main drive ideology, if you want. Okay, so let's talk about ideology. What ideology was the model based on? Because model may well come with an ideology, no? Which is the point made by Romer before. You remember the Martinez story. So model will reflect the interest, disciplinary orientation, and bias of their developers. Sometimes the bias is disciplinary. Because I'm a biologist, I model in a certain way. If I am an ecologist, I model in a different way. This comes with the discipline. And this is makes sure that disciplines are not really neutral, no? And this was known to political scientists, to sociologists. This is Ulrich Beck. He wrote already in '86 that when you can decide what kind of output you have by simply deciding who are the experts. Okay, so he wrote this many years ago. So you now understand why and how you can manipulate the outcome of even of a panel of distinguished experts by simply deciding on the discipline of the expert, maybe. Okay. And this, for instance, is very relevant if you want to discuss issues like endocrine disruptors. No, it depends if you have the ecologist or the biologist and so on. So we suggest that we wrote a paper with a few colleagues where we suggest that if you want to have an antidote to this non-neutrality is to multiply the number of lenses which you wear when you look at the issue. So not only the lens of the neoclassical economist, but also the lens of the relational ecologist, the lens of the post-normal scientist, the lens of the non-Ricardian economist, you know, and okay, many things to digest. But the idea, in another study, we try to include feminist economics, but the reviewers wouldn't want to hear about that. Though it's stupid, because really, if you look at feminist economics, they are really alternative and antagonist to many of the way of framing social issues. If you think of COVID and the importance of care in COVID, not looking at COVID with the lenses of feminist economics is a real loss for society. Okay, but this is another political. So, a few words about sociology or quantification. For sociology or quantification, it's fairly obvious that you must have two-dimensional quality. Technical, for instance, compute carefully your uncertainty, and normative. What are the consequences of what you are doing? Is your assessment neglecting some group? Are you creating some invisibility? Or is the outcome of your analysis materially affecting the life of certain segment of the population or society? So this comes from Amartya Sen, this comes from Robert Saleh wrote about that. Post-normal science people also discussed a lot about this issue of the fairness of a quantification in terms of its implication for policy. The example which does Saleh is very good. The example is about employment, and he shows about the indicator of employment, which were built to defend employment, were then reformulated to destroy employment. Okay, so a measure which was done so as to be sure that everyone has a safe and kind of employment which would allow everyone to run a life, were transformed by a neoliberal logic into measures whose objective was to downgrade and downgrade and downgrade the quality of the same employment, up to the point where people would not even recognize it as employment anymore. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. There's a chapter there which is really very interesting. So mind the consequences. This will not be a surprise. I mentioned already the subprime mortgage crisis, which was to a large extent due to models which were evaluating those portfolios. There is something called the Lee-Coppola formula. Okay, I won't enter into that now. But the point is that if you study the literature at the time when this happened, well, many people knew that those models were not good at all. Okay, they knew that they had been calibrated in a period in which the house market was going up. So everyone understood that if the market decided to go down, the calibration would no longer be good. But anyhow, but sometimes it's convenient to assume that the model is working because people are running a profit on it. Mind the unknown has to do with the idea that there is something called ignorance, and we should acknowledge ignorance. Once upon a time, ignorance was considered to be a virtue, no? For example, in Socrates, Nicholas Cutanus docta ignorantia against, no? Until Descartes, ignorance was a virtue. Then with Descartes, ignorance is something we have to get rid of, thanks to new and better knowledge and the power of mathematics and geometry. Fauci, for instance, you know, you may like or not like him, but when he was asked by some politician to give a number for number of casualties in the USA for COVID, he said, I cannot give you a number answer. No, this is a kind of attitude which even modelers should take. When you cannot compute a number, you shouldn't be giving a number. And of course, he couldn't give a number because how can I tell you how many people will die if I don't even know what you will do to prevent people from dying. So this is not even uncertainty. This is what Bruce Wynne would call is Bruce Wynne? Indeterminacy, no? So I don't know, not because I'm uncertain, but because there are things I don't know yet how they will play out. Okay, so they are indeterminate in a sense. And there is, of course, we have to remain aware that not everyone is trained the way we are trained in mathematics. And so there is a kind of dramatic knowledge asymmetry, which is very strong in the case of mathematical model, where we use calculus and things like that. So some kind of vigilance, either from ourselves as modelers or from society, in this case would be advisable. I have an article about that with a group of friends again, this time from the University College in London, on why this would call for some kind of ethics of quantification, because sometimes numbers are produced which are really not good or dangerous, and someone should be looking at them in a way. So I mentioned that technical quality and normative quality should go hand in hand, and I suggest that technical quality goes with sensitivity analysis, and normative quality goes with sensitivity auditing, which I will introduce in a second. But don't buy this. You could have others, methodologies or technique. The important is the idea that there are multiple dimensions of quality. And the people in post-normal science, about which I didn't have much time to talk today, they knew this. You know, this book is from 1990, and they talk about uncertainty and quality. You know, again, these two components. You know, there is a uncertainty has to do with how your technical numbers are stand, and quality has to do with what those numbers do in and with society. So sensitivity analysis, okay, I wrote this book which Massimo mentioned. This is also, the other one is a Chinese version of the book, because then this also was translated into Chinese, which is very nice. The book is very expensive, but has been pirated by the Russians, so it's now freely available on the web. You can find it. Sensitivity analysis can also be done with simple scatter plot, no? So I will just mention this very, very briefly. It is obvious that the first variable is more important than the second, because the axis is always y, no? The vertical axis. The horizontal axis is two different variables. This variable gives a lot of shape to the output. This doesn't. So the first variable is more important than the second. I can take the local average, compute the local average of the scatter plot. You will see where I'm going in a second. So this is each point is a local average of the output. If I take the variance of these pink dots, I obtain a measure, which is in fact a sensitivity measure. So this is how a sensitivity analysis measure is built. This is a global sensitivity measure. Clearly, the first variable is a larger sensitivity measure. The statisticians know this measure. They call it with a different name. They call it Pearson correlation ratio. We call this first order sensitivity indices. But okay, we don't do this theory now. There is a school for that, if you're interested, done by the JRC every 2 years. This is a more interesting case because this variable seems to be non-important. I say seems. Why do I say seems to be non-important? Or is it, the question is this variable important or not? Yeah, in fact, it's important because you see that the variance grows. Okay, so the mean stays constant, but the variance grows. This flags a model with interactions. Okay, and there are sensitivity measures for this kind of variables as well. Okay, stop with sensitivity analysis. Sensitivity auditing is a bit what you heard already from me about the manifesto. It's also included in the guidelines of the European Commission and has to do with this issue of assumption, framing, and so on and so forth, which I already discussed. The rule of sensitivity auditing resembles very much the rule of the manifesto. So you have, this could be, one could be the hubris or the rhetorical use, assumption hunting, check if uncertainty has been instrumentally inflated or deflated. If you study regulatory capture, you will see that very often the game is to inflate or deflate the uncertainty. If you are the producer of a toxic chemical, you may have interest in inflate the uncertainty in the toxicity of this chemical. If you are the regulator and you measure the toxicity, you want to show that the uncertainty is reduced so that you can regulate. So there's a kind of dynamic fight between the two. And so everyone try to play uncertainty strategically. Okay, 4 is to do sensitivity analysis before publishing your paper. Transparency, you know, I go back to transparency in a second. 6 is again the issue of framing, no? Do the right sum, not just the sum right. And then 7, okay, perform technical uncertainty. So now something a bit controversial, maybe you will kill me for that, but I think that, that the numbers which we produce for the cost of CO2 are fantastic, no? Why they are fantastic? Well, first of all, because they are given in this way, no? Like cost of carbon, $56 per ton of CO2 or 172. The two values correspond to the different discount rate. As if these were crisp numbers, but these numbers are not crisp. These numbers are themselves average of other things. So in a sense, I believe that these numbers are fantastic, but these numbers are taken very seriously by many serious people, and they are used as a base for formulating policy. So for people in my club, how is this possible? Anyhow, yeah, there are clearly different clubs of people around, but for these people, and these numbers, yeah, I forgot to mention, they are the result of a cost-benefit analysis extending 3 centuries into the future. Okay. Okay, I said my point. So Jerry, which is one of the persons in my club, he says, well, perhaps we have reached the point where everyone knows that these numbers are fantastic, no? Everyone knows, but the game keeps going on simply because people don't know. There are many people who don't know, so there is still money to be made out of it, okay, if you wish. So maybe Jerry is a bit cynical here, but you know, I think it's very much what's going on in a sense, no? The game only works because most people, those people who are not like modelers like us, don't know about that. So in this book, which is about to come out, in the epilogue of the book, I say, well, models are special because in mathematical modeling, you have a huge repertoire of methods, even more than in statistics. Modeling is not a discipline. So in modeling, everyone does what he wants. It's a kind of Far West, if you wish, okay? Modeling also escapes sociology or quantification. Well, you don't know that, but I can tell you that sociologists or quantification are very strong on statistics, very strong on artificial intelligence. They discuss a lot algorithmics, but they don't discuss much mathematical modeling because for them it's objectively probably a bit difficult, no? And then they enjoy a lot of epistemic authority because they borrow epistemic authority from mathematics. Okay, so this is again a bit the Cartesian thing. And the result of this, model can have a pretense of neutrality, what Luhmann and other sociologists call the paradoxification. So if I use a mathematical model, you may have the impression that my policy is rational. In fact, my policy is irrational, but the model gives an impression of rationality. No antibodies to fight degeneration, because to fight degeneration, you need a discipline with leaders in the discipline, like in statistics. In statistics, when things don't work, the leaders of the discipline of statistics start complaining. Then there is also the story of the transscience. Transscience is when you have problems which can be formulated as scientific, but cannot be solved as scientific. Okay, I'm not that I'm accumulating a lot of concept here, but you can, and then there is the thing that you can use them ritualistically, no? To show that you go through the motion of calculating, though this calculation is more ritual than effective. And Peter Enzer is a statistician talking about statistical ritual. So in other words, and I'm now at the end of my talk, there are different political economies of mathematical modeling. I see a lot of this one. The important institution with large model can gain epistemic authority. The alternative would be to have reproducibility in those calculations ensured by transparency, which would give legitimacy, and then this would also give you a different kind of epistemic authority. I'm not sure I want to defend this because transparency is not always an option, especially on large mathematical models. So maybe we need a different words. Contestability. Can the model be contested if it cannot be opened or something like this? I don't know. I don't know myself. And well, that was my, so I can leave that. This was my last slide. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Pass this. If you have to use that, click it. Yeah, that's not.
Much more than this. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I have, I guess, a lot of questions, but I will choose one. I guess so. I think, at least for us, I think at least half of us in this institute do a particular kind of modeling that maybe it's, I mean, it's included like within the framework of your talk, but maybe it has certain characteristic more, which is not prediction, but forecasting or backcasting. So you of course you have even more uncertainty, even more freedom, and even more relationship with policy. And about that, so I think one very important piece of the puzzle is that in being able to use or to start a series of good practices in the science is that at the same time we are requested, as the COVID people were requested by society, to give those numbers. So on the one hand, we have of course we are asked to be scientific, we are asked to be as good as possible, but at the same time we are asked to give precise numbers. For example, the social cost of carbon, for example, and so in a sense, I think we have a sort of temptation to I don't want to say it wide, but to avoid propagating the uncertainty up to the final level, up to the policymaker, because that uncertainty is actually frowned upon implicitly by the way the system is structured. And so I was wondering if you had an insight on the other side of the table, or how, if it's possible, how it's possible to actually, let's say, improve not only the science within itself, but improve the relation between the science and the policy interface, which seems to me like where most of the power dynamic come from, and therefore most of the problems come from.
I don't know if I have an answer, but for sure, we or you, us, we live a contradiction, and the term contradiction means they don't go away easily, right? Otherwise, there wouldn't be contradiction. So this is one of the typical contradictions we face in our daily practice. And we live with contradiction. It would be silly to believe that we don't have those contradictions. But when it comes to policy, I was always a bit skeptical of the idea that the policymakers don't want uncertainty, because in a sense, uncertainty creates the space for political negotiation, while certainty close the negotiation because shows one solution as optimal. Imagine that there are 2 or 3 possible solutions on the table, and because you are kind of reducing the uncertainty, one of them stands out, and so the debate is closed. Imagine instead that you are open about uncertainty, and the values, they are not equal, but in their uncertainty, they more or less cover the same space. So you really, you can say A is possibly better than B, but not so much. So if you have a situation in which more policy options remain viable, simply because I haven't constrained the uncertainty, I'm maybe doing the policymaker a favor because I'm giving more space for negotiation, or I'm giving to some policymaker because they would be disagree, of course. But I might not quash the hopes of one of the stakeholders, for instance, who favor one of the hypotheses which would otherwise be excluded. I don't know. This is just a possibility.
Can I say something on this?
Yeah.
The European Commission uses 3 models to estimate the impact of climate policies on the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And each model provides a point estimates plus a small uncertainty range. And the 3 models, one model shows a cost, one model shows a benefit, and one model shows zero.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a reason why there are those 3 models, because they leave open negotiations between the member states and interpretation of the results. On the other hand, the Commission has asked explicitly in various proposals, also in the past years, to reduce the uncertainties coming out of each of these single models. And there have been actually calls to reduce them because they found that they were hard to interpret, uncertainties which were perceived as too large. In essence, the negotiation is good insofar a model is very precise, and then you can employ multiple models, like in this case for the Commission case. But the fact that the range that we produced were very large, in some cases, were perceived as if the models were not, were imprecise, and so they were not, they were frowned upon. Just as a comment to this point. So
yeah, this may well be the case. This may well be the case. On the other hand, if you want to be truly radical, do we need more knowledge to act? Really? Think of all those things in which we know very well what's wrong and about which we don't do much. No? So, I mean, this idea that we are prevented from doing the right things by lack of knowledge very often is not terribly convincing, because it's maybe an excuse, it's a convenient, is a convenient way to dress up an political unwillingness. Look what happened now recently with the war and the necessity to curtail the import of gas. It was evident that it wasn't easy at all. No, so we understand why we will not decarbonize so quickly the economy. Yeah, we're seeing it very clearly. When we need to decarbonize because there is a war on our borders, we still struggle. No, it's not an easy task. So very often we know really well what we need to do, but we don't do it, and this is not for lack of the fault cannot be really put at the door of science. It's not because scientists cannot come up with more certainty. I think. I mean, so we shouldn't feel guilty for that. I mean, that's the way science operates. Science operates in the midst of uncertainty. Otherwise, it wouldn't be science. Yeah.
It's on. My question is very short. Is economics a science? According to all of that you said, I mean, it's everyone has their opinion. I'm just asking for yours, not for.
Yeah. Many of my friends are economists, so I should be careful what I say. Economics is much less of a science every time it tries to copy science. So the more economics struggle to be like physics, the less it is a science. Then it really becomes a kind of parody. No, it becomes a bad example. Economics has a content value, no, but the same happened to sociology or to psychology. Whenever those disciplines try to parrot physics, no, and to become quantitative, they often run into ridiculous, no. And economists is the one, but economists are so smart that they normally can get away with that and even get higher salaries in the university.
Is that economist?
No, I was wondering if you had towards to spend about everything because of the fact that the models that we do, especially, are going to change our own projections. For example, I was thinking of owners in the future. So I was thinking about the example of the cars. When you asked how many cars in the future, how many passengers in the car?
Yeah.
Well, the answer might depend on how. So the truth is, it really will be the number of passengers in the cars. It also depends on how we respond to that question today and we develop policy accordingly.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. You're perfectly right. This number of passengers in the car is not an input. This is all the point. It's not an input. This will be the output of a policy. We can design today policy so that less people will sit in the car as to reduce emission, not to be an input in a calculation. You see the point. The error is to consider this something which is given, as we know. We know that in 2036 there will be on average 2.3 people in each car. This is, you know, what John Kay was complaining about.
Yeah, I have a question on the same part of the car. I agree that we don't know what's going to happen, but at certain point we have to do some assumption if we want to have some answer. So it's a tricky question, it's a tricky problem because of course we're not sure what's going to happen, but maybe we don't want to answer the question regarding like the number of people in the car, if that's needed for something else, some other behavior that we want to see. So
Yeah.
what do we do here?
No, it's very simple. You say, I am uncertain. So let's be practical. People in a car could go up or down. I don't know. So I say between -5 and +5. Okay. Then we can have a discussion if this distribution is reasonable, but this distribution is better than, say, 2.3. So if I say between -5 and +5, no, I say I'm very uncertain about that. Almost one order of magnitude, in fact, no? And I plug into the model this uncertainty. Now, two things may happen. This is an important variable and makes the output totally undeterminate. And I say, let's go home. We cannot do this calculation, too uncertain. We don't know. Or, in spite of this uncertainty, your outcome is still useful for policy, still gives you a signal, no? So this is the way it should be done. So you have to see if you still have a signal once all the uncertainty has been honestly factored in. And so you can do you can do your work in this case.
A couple of questions of mine, maybe I try to summarize. One is about whether there's a gold, to what extent there is a gold standard of modeling public policy at all. And the other is, what would happen if ethical communication or uncertainty in science was to happen only on one side, and not on the other, meaning, for example, science funded by corporations. Would it be ethical if one new climate change communication project would slow down because of that?
Sorry, and the first one was
Whether there is any gold standard.
No, okay. The gold standard, careful. Now, when someone talks about the gold standard, please be skeptical because there's always one more gold standard. Okay. So, randomized control trial. That's the gold standard. Well, depends. May well be or may not be because, a situation which was calibrated in a kind of setting, given society and culture, is extrapolated to a different society and culture and doesn't work at all. So, careful with the gold standard. Be humble. No, so this idea of the humble. No, it doesn't work in this way. Uncertainty is, however strategically uncertainty is used, and however more powerful corporate power is, because corporate power is more powerful in terms of resources, money, scientists, models, and all that, everyone wants to play on uncertainty. Okay, so I agree with you then, and I also wrote on that on regulatory capture, that the problem is that corporate power has deepest pocket, and having deepest pocket they can purchase more science, no, and disseminate their science more than the average citizen can ever be. So there is a tremendous asymmetry of power in when you have the citizen against corporate power, for instance, in the agrochemical sector, no? And that's where the lack of some kind of institution which would act as a bearer of the questions of the citizen, the absence of this kind of institution is in a sense dramatic. So you have those regulators which end up very quickly being captured, and then who is opposing this. Some lone warrior in some university who is not paid by Monsanto or what's not. So the problem is a problem of power also given by money. I also would like to play strategically the uncertainty, but I don't have the the resources of doing this. It's really a matter of power and resources.
Okay, good. So we are at the hour. Thanks, Andrea, and hope this was useful and constructive. We met them all. Let's not just giving them out what to get there. And thanks again. And,
thank you.
the slides are online. So.
Yeah.
Well, because you have
Yes,
so many
yes,
reference to books and articles.
Yeah, the slides are online already. Yes, we can see them.